Cellular respiration and fermentation. So here's a simple overview. One of the important things that I want you to note here is that in this process where photosynthesis only occurred in one cell type, we will see this process occurring in both plant and animal cell types. So cellular respiration is the process where energy is going to be released. So you're going to produce energy in some form, and you need oxygen to involve it. So this would be, by definition, where we break things down, would be a catabolic reaction. So respiration, of course, is going to occur here in our mitochondria. Mitochondria are found in both cell types. On your diagram, that's what you colored red and oranges with. Mitochondria is a lot of times nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell. And the idea here is it's going to convert energy that is stored in the bonds of a simple sugar and some fats into a chemical energy called ATP and release it. Of course, that is adenosine triphosphate. The process is carried out within the matrix in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, as you can see here in this cutaway example on your diagram. Whereas the two chemical processes that take place in or near the mitochondria are going to be cellular respiration and fermentation. It's dependent upon whether oxygen is present or not present as to what may be occurring. So nutrients used in cellular respiration are animal and plant cells commonly use this in the form of glucose, which is a carbohydrate, amino acids, proteins, fatty acids, lipids, and of course those are all macromolecules. Chemical pathways. Cellular respiration is an aerobic process, meaning oxygen will need to be present, whereas fermentation is considered an anaerobic process and we do not have oxygen present. The use of oxygen is not required. Both will occur and produce energy of some form in the form of ATP. So respiration is actually a three-stage process. Photosynthesis was a two-stage process, but respiration will be three stages. And we will have the first stage is referred to as glycolysis. The second stage is called the Krebs cycle. And our third stage will be referred to as the electron transport or electron transport chain. Glycolysis, our first stage, you will find this in both cellular respiration as well as fermentation. And basically what's happening here is that it is going to not take place actually in the mitochondria. This occurs outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm, a lot of times referred to as systole. And what happens is you're going to take a simple glucose molecule and it's going to be cleaved into two and broken down into a compound referred to as pyruvic acid. So if you look at it chemically, glucose being C6H12O6, it will be broken in half basically into pyruvic acid, which is C3H4O3, and you actually get two of them, so things balance. But here's the interesting thing. In this process, we actually produce two ATP, two high energy containing compounds are manufactured. And again, this is taking place not in the mitochondria, but outside the mitochondria. So in this illustration here, that the glucose molecule, this is all happening in the cytoplasm, will be broken down, so systole here is cytoplasm, and it will be producing two ATP molecules. It also produces two molecules of NADH, which can be used later in photosynthesis. And then the two pyruvate molecules can be used and move into the second stage of photosynthesis, which is called the Krebs cycle. So following glycolysis, the pyruvate will go into the mitochondria, enter into first the Krebs cycle, and then it'll enter into the electron transport chain. Both of these processes are occurring along the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So here we have the Krebs cycle. It is also sometimes referred to as the citric acid cycle. And here the pyruvic acid is broken down into what we commonly refer to as the one of the products of cellular respiration, that's carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is going to be produced in the Krebs cycle. And you will also at this point produce 2 more ATP. So as a total, from one glucose molecule entering first into glycolysis will give you 2 ATP, and now it's producing 2 more, so we have a total of now 4 ATP being produced. The third cycle here is the electron transport chain, where following the Krebs cycle, here we're going to start to see the production of ADP producing more ATP. The Bozeman Science video series does a great job of going into detail on this, and that of course will be one of your focus notes to do. So here, this is where oxygen is necessary. So you'll need oxygen as a reactant. We're going to also produce the water out of the electron transport chain. So along here, we will see along the membrane of the mitochondria, the inner membrane, that folded area right in here, this process occurring. The details of this you can look at in that focus notes video. That's why I gave it to you to do, to get more of an overview of how this electron transport chain system works. But one of the things that I want to bring to your attention is in the electron transport chain. Here we are producing the most ATP. So out of this we will have 38 total ATP produced when the complete 3 cycles of cellular respiration have ran. So that means that within the electron transport chain you're going to get 34 ATP, because the other 4 were produced in the first 2 stages. So it's not 38, but it's 34. And this is only about 38% of the total energy that the glucose molecule actually contains. The other 62% of that energy is always going to be released in the form of heat. So that's about as efficient as this gets. So for one glucose molecule, you're going to get about 38% of it giving you a chemical energy that cells can use in the form of ATP. The other is burnt off. The cells have to, release it as heat. This is why we have body heat in living organisms. So ATP production, kind of a net, you get 2 in the glycolysis, 2 in the Krebs cycle, and again 34 are produced in the electron transport chain. And of course this is this side that we need to have oxygen. So without oxygen, when we get to fermentation, you're not going to get as much ATP. This illustration is a good one. It shows you how this is kind of working in terms of the net production. So in glycolysis, which is outside the mitochondria, you're only going to get 2 ATP produced here. Okay, then you will only get 2 when it enters into the Krebs cycle, and then you will get 34 when it comes out of the electron transport chain. And again, the focus note videos, especially about electron transport chain, do a great job of giving you the fine-tooth details of this whole process. Fermentation will follow similar to cellular respiration in the sense that you will have glycolysis occurring because you don't need oxygen. And then there are 2 kinds of fermentation. We will be dealing with this form of fermentation in a future lab. It's one of my favorite labs that I'm going to have you do, and that's a muscle fatigue, where you will produce lactic acid. So I'll leave that as just kind of a teaser for things to come. But the two types of fermentation, with alcohol fermentation versus lactic acid, alcohol fermentation is where alcohol is formed from the fermentation of sugars, whereas lactic, and it's very characteristic in the organisms called yeast. They can do this very well. Whereas lactic acid fermentation is formed in muscle cells, and this is what you'll get to experience. And this is what, when you are working out really strenuously, using muscles a lot, and you feel the burning sensation within the muscle cells, that's due to the fact lactic acid is built up and it's preventing the cells from contracting, and it's also because the cells are being deprived of oxygen. You're asking them to work outside of having oxygen, and that's kind of a byproduct, this lactic acid, from occurring. So aerobic pathways, you use oxygen, anaerobic pathways, you do not use oxygen. We had to compare the two, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis captures energy, cellular respiration releases it. Photosynthesis occurs in chloroplast, cellular respiration in mitochondria. The reactants of photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. Products are glucose and oxygen. And cellular respiration would be the reverse, where we need reactants of glucose and oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. So you can see that these two actually form a nice circular thing. Plants can do both, animals can only do this. So in plants we see both happening, okay, whereas animal cells you can only see